My daughter's best friend accused me of having her. My daughter didn't even believe me. They immediately called the police and took me for questioning. I'm Mike, 41, and I've been a single dad to my 16-year-old daughter, Lauren, since she was just a kid. I'll be honest. I never expected to be in this position, trying to untangle myself from something as messed up as what I'm about to tell you. I've spent years raising Lauren, and we've built a pretty strong father-daughter relationship. I thought I was a decent parent, though never perfect. That said, what happened recently turned my world upside down in a way I never thought possible. It all started one Friday evening when Lauren asked if her friend Kelly could stay the night. I'd met Kelly a couple of times, mostly in passing. She seemed like a typical teenager, friendly enough, though maybe a little too bold sometimes. But I trust Lauren's judgment, so I didn't think twice about saying yes. I figured they'd watch some movies, talk about school drama, maybe sneak a few snacks past midnight. Nothing unusual, right? Lauren and Kelly spent most of the evening hanging out in Lauren's room, laughing and making noise the way teenagers do. Around midnight, I went to check on them, mostly just to tell them to keep it down since I had work early the next day. When I knocked and peeked in, they were both sitting cross-legged on the bed, phones in hand, and they just waved me off, laughing and rolling their eyes like I was the world's biggest annoyance. It was normal, and I left them to it. After a while, I went to bed, figuring that was the end of it. At some point in the early morning, maybe around 2 a.m., I woke up and thought I heard someone moving around downstairs. I assumed it was Lauren getting a glass of water or something, but just to be sure, I got up and headed to the kitchen. When I got there, I was surprised to see Kelly standing by the fridge. She was dressed in one of those oversized t-shirts that teenagers seem to live in, looking slightly nervous when she noticed me. "Hey, couldn't sleep?" I asked, trying to keep things casual. Kelly shrugged, giving me a small, shy smile. "Yeah, I guess. Sorry if I woke you up." I shook my head, saying it was fine. But then something about her demeanor struck me as odd. She lingered a little longer than I expected, just standing there in the dimly lit kitchen. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but there was this look in her eyes, a kind of focus or intensity that felt out of place. "Is everything all right?" I asked. She hesitated for a moment, biting her lip in a way that felt almost too deliberate. Then, to my utter shock, she stepped forward, closing the space between us. Before I could fully process what was happening, she reached out, brushing her hand over my arm, and leaned in, her face alarmingly close to mine. "Kelly, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper, trying to keep calm even though my mind was racing. She looked up at me, her expression shifting from hesitant to almost determined. Then she leaned in even closer, her hand sliding up my arm. I pulled back immediately, raising both hands in a defensive gesture. "Kelly, this is completely inappropriate," I said, stepping away from her, my tone sharper than I'd intended. She stared at me, and for a second, I saw something flash across her face. Anger, maybe? Hurt? It was hard to tell. She quickly dropped her gaze, mumbled a soft, "sorry," and shuffled back toward Lauren's room without another word. I stood there in shock for a long moment, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. Eventually, I went back to bed, convinced it was some weird, misguided attempt at, I don't even know what. I chalked it up to teenage confusion, hormones, or something I didn't understand, but I was certain that it was over. Or so I thought. The next morning, things were tense. I could feel it hanging in the air between me and Kelly, even though she barely made eye contact with me. She left pretty early, mumbling a quick goodbye to Lauren without looking my way. I felt relieved, figuring that she was just embarrassed and that would be the end of it. A few days later, everything came crashing down. I was in the middle of a routine day at work when my phone started buzzing nonstop. Texts from Lauren, missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, and a voicemail from the school counselor, all demanding my immediate attention. I felt a pit form in my stomach as I listened to the voicemail. Apparently, Kelly had accused me of inappropriate behavior. I could barely believe it. The words felt surreal, echoing in my ears as I tried to process what I was hearing. I kept thinking, this can't be happening, but it was. I raced home, my mind in a complete frenzy. Lauren was in her room, crying, refusing to look at me. She'd heard from Kelly, and she was upset, angry, confused, all of it directed at me. It was like a nightmare. "Dad, how could you?" she asked, her voice breaking. I tried to explain, to tell her what really happened, but she was barely listening. Kelly had told everyone her version of the story, painting me as some kind of predator who had made a move on her in the middle of the night. She claimed I had tried to kiss her, that I'd made her uncomfortable, that I'd crossed every line. And because she was Lauren's friend, Lauren believed her without question. I spent hours trying to explain to Lauren, telling her exactly what happened. I could see how much she wanted to believe me, but Kelly was her friend, and the doubt lingered in her eyes. It hurt more than I could put into words, knowing that my own daughter thought I might be capable of something so vile. Then, things escalated further. The school got involved, and suddenly it wasn't just between me, Lauren, and Kelly. I was getting calls from other parents, some of whom I barely knew, questioning me, subtly accusing me, and hinting that they'd heard things. Word had spread fast, and the story seemed to grow with each telling. Days turned into weeks, and I felt the weight of every stare, every whisper. Parents in the neighborhood started avoiding me. People who used to wave or nod in my direction acted like they didn't even see me anymore. It was like a dark cloud had settled over my life, and there was no way to shake it off. I decided to reach out to Kelly's parents, hoping that they might understand. I thought if I could just explain to them, maybe they could talk to Kelly, maybe even get her to tell the truth. But when I tried, they slammed the door in my face. They didn't want to hear it. They believed their daughter, and to them, that was the end of it. I felt completely isolated. Lauren was distant, barely speaking to me except when absolutely necessary. She kept saying she didn't know who to believe, but I could tell she was leaning toward Kelly. A few days after the accusations started circling, I got a call from the police. They wanted me to come down to the station for a conversation, but I knew what that meant. My heart sank, but I went. There was no choice. I couldn't ignore it, couldn't run from it. I walked into that station feeling like a stranger in my own skin. A part of me still couldn't believe this was real, but another part knew I had to face it, had to clear my name somehow. They led me into an interview room, sterile, gray, with a single table and 2 chairs. The detective assigned to my case introduced himself as Detective Harris. He was an older man, looked tired, like he'd been through this 1,000 times. He gestured for me to sit, and I did, feeling my palms start to sweat as he sat across from me, studying me in that way only cops do. "All right, Mike," he began, his voice calm, almost gentle. "We've had a serious allegation made against you. I'm sure you're aware of it." I nodded, feeling my throat go dry. "I know what's being said, but it's not true. Kelly, she made it all up. I swear to you, Detective, I didn't do anything to her. I told her to back off when she tried to get close to me. That's all." Detective Harris listened, expression unreadable. He nodded slowly, taking notes as I talked, asking a few questions here and there. How well did I know Kelly? Had there ever been any other incidents? Did I have a history of anything remotely inappropriate? He was careful with his words, but I could tell he was searching for something. Some crack, some inconsistency. I felt sick under his gaze, like I was guilty just by sitting there. As I answered each question, telling him every detail I could remember, it became clear that Lauren had already sided with Kelly. She'd apparently spoken to the police, backing up Kelly's story. My own daughter believed that I was some kind of predator. The realization hit me hard, a weight settling deep in my chest. Lauren had looked me in the eye just days ago and chosen to believe her friend over me, her own father. Detective Harris eventually closed his notebook and looked at me with something almost like sympathy. "Look, Mike, I know this isn't easy. These situations never are. But right now, there's a young girl accusing you, and she's got people backing her up. I need you to understand how serious this is." I nodded, trying to keep myself together. "I understand, but I didn't do it. I would never do something like that." He studied me for a moment longer before finally letting me go. Walking out of that station felt surreal, like I just stepped into some parallel universe where everything was warped and twisted. I got back in my car and just sat there, numb, staring out the windshield. The weight of what had happened settled in, heavier than ever. My daughter, the person I'd sacrificed everything for, worked so hard to protect and raise, had turned her back on me. Over the next few days, things went from bad to worse. Lauren, who'd already been cold and distant, took things a step further. One night, I saw a notification from social media. Lauren had made a post. My stomach dropped as I read her words. "Believe women," that's all it said. But that single phrase felt like a knife to my heart. She'd chosen her side, and it wasn't mine. She blocked me on every platform, cutting off any possibility of contact. I tried calling her friends, asking them to help me reach out, but no one answered. It was like the whole world was turning against me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I kept trying, though. I reached out to her mom, my ex, hoping she might be able to get through to Lauren, but even that backfired. Apparently, Lauren had already talked to her, and her mom believed Kelly's story too. She said things like, "This is serious, Mike. I never thought you'd do something like this, but maybe I didn't know you as well as I thought." Hearing that from her only added salt to the wound. My ex and I had our differences, but I never thought she'd think I was capable of something like this. I started to feel like I was drowning in a tidal wave of accusations and betrayal, with no lifeline in sight. The police investigation dragged on, and every day felt like an eternity. I barely slept, barely ate. All I could think about was how my life had fallen apart overnight. Friends who used to call or visit suddenly kept their distance. Colleagues at work looked at me differently, some whispering behind my back, others avoiding me altogether. I was becoming a pariah in my own community, and it felt like there was no escape. A few weeks into the investigation, I was called back into the station. This time, Detective Harris had more questions, more details that had apparently come up. Kelly had claimed that I'd made advances on her multiple times, that I'd been inappropriate with her even when Lauren wasn't around. She painted a picture of me as some kind of monster, twisting every interaction we'd had into something sinister. Sitting there, listening to Harris recount Kelly's accusations, I felt my pulse racing. I wanted to scream, to tell him that none of it was true, that this was all some kind of nightmare. But I forced myself to stay calm, answering each question with as much clarity as I could. I told him, again and again, that I'd done nothing wrong, that Kelly had come on to me and I'd rejected her. But it felt like my words were falling on deaf ears. The investigation seemed to gain momentum, as though every word Kelly said was adding fuel to the fire. The more she talked, the more it felt like I was sinking deeper into a hole I couldn't escape. Lauren, meanwhile, continued to distance herself, making it clear that she wanted nothing to do with me. I was officially dead to her. One night, I found myself scrolling through her social media, desperate to understand what was going on in her mind. She'd posted more than just the "Believe Women" message. There were other posts now, photos of her and Kelly, smiling, laughing, with captions that hinted at the strength they were finding in each other. It was like I was watching my own daughter celebrate my downfall, and it tore me apart. I tried to reach out to my own family, hoping they might understand, might believe me, but even they were hesitant. My sister, who'd always been close to me, seemed distant when I called her. "Mike," she said softly, "I want to believe you, but this is serious. Kelly wouldn't just make something like this up. And Lauren, she's hurting. Maybe you should just step back for a while. Give her some space." Her words crushed me. I was losing everyone, one person at a time, and there was nothing I could do about it. After Lauren's post and the police investigation, the fallout hit fast and hard. Every time I left the house, I felt the weight of people's eyes on me. Neighbors who used to greet me with friendly waves now crossed the street when they saw me coming, pretending not to notice. It was like a cloud of shame followed me everywhere, and I couldn't shake it. One morning, I went to the grocery store, trying to keep my head down and finish shopping as quickly as possible. I knew people had been talking, but I wasn't prepared for what I saw. As I rounded a corner in the store, I saw Mrs. Jenkins, an older woman who'd lived on my street for years, standing there with her son, Ben. They both gave me a look of pure disgust. Mrs. Jenkins shook her head, whispering something to Ben as if I couldn't hear. When I passed by, I heard her mutter, "The nerve of him showing his face around here." Ben didn't even try to hide his disdain. "People like him don't deserve a second chance," he spat, loud enough for me to hear. I felt a chill run through me, the realization sinking deeper. These were people I'd known for years, people I'd helped with groceries, fixed their mailboxes, even invited over for barbecues. Now, they looked at me like I was some kind of criminal, and there was no way to explain, no way to make them see the truth. I left the store as quickly as I could, the shame burning hot in my chest. But the worst part was yet to come. My ex-wife Sarah had been civil enough with me since our divorce, co-parenting Lauren with minimal conflict. She trusted me around our daughter, despite everything. But now, all that trust was gone. After Kelly's accusation, Sarah had barely spoken to me. She'd refused to let me see Lauren, claiming it was for her protection, but I knew it was more than that. Finally, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I went to Sarah's house, desperate to talk to her, to make her understand that I was innocent. When she opened the door, the look on her face was cold and distant, like she was seeing a stranger. "What do you want, Mike?" she asked, her voice icy. "Sarah, please," I said, swallowing hard. "I didn't do this. Kelly, she's lying. I need you to believe me." She crossed her arms, looking at me with a mixture of anger and sadness. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Mike. Lauren is devastated. Kelly is her best friend. Why would she lie about something like this?" "Because, I don't know, Sarah," I stammered, struggling to find the right words. "Maybe she's angry because I turned her down. Maybe she's just confused. But I swear to you, I didn't do anything wrong." Sarah shook her head, sighing heavily. "Mike, do you even hear yourself? This is a teenage girl we're talking about. You're blaming her to save yourself, and that's exactly why I can't trust you." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt my throat tighten, a lump forming that I couldn't swallow down. "Sarah, please, I need you to believe me. You know me. You know I'd never—" "Stop," she interrupted, her voice sharp. "Lauren doesn't want to see you. She feels betrayed, Mike. And honestly, so do I. I thought I knew who you were, but now, I don't know. I don't think I ever knew you." She closed the door before I could say another word, leaving me standing there, feeling like my heart had been ripped out. I was losing everything: my daughter, my reputation, and now even the last shreds of trust from the woman I'd once loved. I stood there for a long time, staring at the door, numb and defeated. Things only got worse from there. Word continued to spread, faster than I could ever have imagined. My oldest friend, Dave, who I'd known since college, stopped returning my calls. At first, I thought he was just busy, so I went over to his place one evening, hoping we could talk in person. When he opened the door and saw me standing there, he looked uncomfortable, like he didn't want to let me in. "Hey, Mike," he said, glancing around as if checking to see if anyone was watching. Now's not really a good time." "Dave, come on," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just need someone to talk to. You're my best friend. Please, just hear me out." He hesitated, his hand on the door, looking torn. But then he shook his head. "Look, man, I don't know what to say. People are talking, and it doesn't look good. I've got kids, Mike. I can't risk, being associated with this." The words hit harder than I expected. This was the guy who'd been my best man, the guy who'd been there for me through every rough patch in my life. And now he was looking at me like I was a stranger. "Dave, you know me. You know I'd never do something like this. You're the one person I thought would believe me." He looked down, avoiding my gaze. "I want to, Mike, I do. But I've got a family to think about. I can't. I just can't. Okay?" He closed the door, and I was left standing there, feeling like a ghost, like I was fading away in front of everyone who once mattered. The isolation became unbearable. Everywhere I went, it was the same. People avoiding me, whispers behind my back, accusing looks from strangers. I tried reaching out to a few more friends, but they all had the same reaction, that same look of disgust or pity, like they were witnessing some kind of tragedy and couldn't bear to be involved. Then, to add insult to injury, I started losing clients at work. I ran my own small business doing home repairs, and over the years, I'd built up a decent reputation in the neighborhood. People trusted me with their homes, their family spaces. But now, clients started canceling appointments, claiming they'd found someone else or didn't need the work done anymore. I could tell by their voices, by the tone of their emails, that they didn't believe me. My business was crumbling just as my life was falling apart. One day, I went to a job site, only to be met by a woman standing on her porch, arms crossed, glaring at me. "I don't want you here," she said, her voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "I can't believe I almost let someone like you into my home." I tried to explain, tried to tell her that the accusations were false, but she wouldn't listen. She just kept shaking her head, calling me every horrible name you could think of, her voice ringing in my ears long after I'd driven away. It felt like the entire world was against me, and there was nowhere I could go to escape it. The worst part of all was that Lauren was still out of reach. I sent her messages, trying to explain, to tell her my side of the story, but she never responded. She'd blocked me everywhere, and every attempt to contact her was met with silence. I tried writing letters, hoping she'd read them, but I never got a reply. She was gone from my life, and it was as though she'd erased me completely. My sister, who'd initially tried to be supportive, eventually gave up too. "Mike," she said one day over the phone, her voice weary, "I don't know what to believe anymore. Maybe you're telling the truth, but it's just too much. I can't keep defending you when everyone else thinks you're guilty. I have to think about my family too." That was the last straw. With each person who walked away, each person who turned their back on me, I felt a little more alone, a little more hopeless. The weight of it all settled on my shoulders, pressing down until I could barely breathe. As the days went by, I found myself avoiding places where people might recognize me. I stopped going to the gym, stopped attending any community events, even skipped family gatherings. I couldn't bear the looks, the whispers, the judgment. It was like I'd become a shadow of myself, fading further with each passing day. All I wanted was a chance to clear my name, to prove that I wasn't the monster they thought I was. But no one would listen, no one would give me the chance. After weeks of feeling isolated, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape, something finally shifted. I didn't know it yet, but the foundation of Kelly's story was beginning to crack. I'd long lost any faith that people would believe me, or that the truth would come out, but life had other plans. It started when I got another call from the police station. At first, I thought it was more questioning, another round of that exhausting, dehumanizing interrogation. I'd grown to dread any contact from the police. Each encounter felt like one step closer to losing what little life I had left. But this time, when I walked into the station, there was a different air about the place. Detective Harris greeted me, and for the first time since the investigation began, I noticed a subtle change in his tone. It was less accusatory, almost curious. "Mike," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Take a seat." I sat down, tension coiling in my gut, bracing for whatever might come next. Harris had a file open on his desk, pages of notes and documents strewn across it. He looked down at them, tapping his pen thoughtfully before he finally spoke. "We've been following up on some details from Kelly's statements," he began, his eyes flicking up to meet mine. "And we've noticed a few inconsistencies." I could barely believe my ears. For weeks, I'd been the guilty one in everyone's eyes, the monster hiding in plain sight. And now, someone was actually questioning her story. "What kind of inconsistencies?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Harris leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "It's small things at first. Details in her timeline that don't quite add up, claims that don't match witness statements or align with other evidence. She mentioned things that conflict with her previous statements, and, well, there's something else." He hesitated, as if weighing whether to say more. "Go on," I urged, my pulse racing. "There's been another report, a neighbor near Kelly's house. They came forward with some information about her stepfather, a man named Rick. According to this neighbor, Rick has a history. Apparently, there's been some tension between him and Kelly, and, well, it's not the first time they've suspected something inappropriate." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. My mind reeled, trying to process what Harris was saying. If Kelly's story was falling apart, if there was someone else involved, someone who might be the real culprit, then maybe, just maybe, I had a chance to clear my name. "So, what happens now?" I asked, struggling to contain the hope stirring within me. Harris sighed. We'll need to bring Kelly in for more questioning. She'll probably deny it at first, but if there's something she's hiding, we'll find it. For now, we just need you to sit tight." I nodded, my mind racing. It was the first glimmer of hope I'd had since this nightmare began, but I knew it wasn't over yet. A few days later, I got a call from my lawyer, Mark, who'd been with me through the entire ordeal. "Mike," he said, his tone cautious but optimistic, "you might want to come down to the office. There's been a development." I drove over, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. When I arrived, Mark was waiting for me, looking as though he was holding back some big news. "They questioned Kelly again," he began, leading me into his office. At first, she stuck to her story, but eventually, under pressure, she started to crack. She admitted that her stepfather, Rick, had been well. She said he was the one who'd actually made advances on her. "She made the whole thing up about you because she was afraid of what he might do if she exposed him." The room felt like it was spinning. All the anger, the frustration, the despair I'd been holding back surged up inside me, overwhelming in its intensity. I had been destroyed, my life torn apart, all because Kelly was too scared to confront her real abuser. Does this mean it's over?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Mark gave me a sad smile. "They're going to close the case against you, Mike. But, well, the damage is done." I sat there, feeling a hollow sense of relief mixed with a deep, aching bitterness. I'd been exonerated, yes, but it didn't erase what I'd been through, what I'd lost. As the news of Kelly's confession spread, I expected people to start coming around, to realize they'd been wrong about me. But that didn't happen. The truth was out, but the stain of the accusation lingered. People are quick to believe the worst, but slow to let go of it. Lauren was one of the first people I thought of, the person whose opinion mattered most to me. She'd been silent, cutting me out completely, and I didn't know if she'd ever be able to forgive herself or me. I wanted so badly for her to see that I was innocent, to realize that she'd abandoned me when I needed her most. But even as I waited, hoping she'd reach out, the silence stretched on. Days turned into weeks, and my world remained shattered. It had been weeks since Kelly's confession, since the truth had finally come out, and yet I still felt like a ghost, wandering through the fragments of my shattered life. The people who had once filled my days were gone, lost in the shadow of false accusations and rumors that still seemed to hang over me. Even though I'd been exonerated, I was left to pick up the pieces of a life that could never be fully put back together. But above all the anger, shame, and betrayal I felt, one feeling stood out, a pain so raw and deep that it was almost impossible to face. My daughter's betrayal. Lauren, the person I had devoted my life to, the person I had loved and protected above everything else, had turned her back on me. She had been the first to believe Kelly's lies, the first to abandon me without so much as a conversation. I could still hear her voice in my head, the way she'd looked at me with fear and disgust, the way she'd blocked me out of her life as if I'd never been her father at all. Then, one day, after months of silence, I received an email. The sender's name was all too familiar, Lauren. My heart clenched as I stared at her name, a mixture of hope and dread pooling in my stomach. Part of me wanted to delete it without reading, to spare myself any more pain. But I couldn't resist. I had to know what she had to say. I clicked on the message, bracing myself. Subject: I'm sorry, Dad. Dad. I don't even know how to start this message. I feel like there's nothing I can say that will make this right, but I need you to know that I am so sorry. I can't believe what I've done. I don't know how I let it get this far, how I let myself believe something so horrible about you. I was so scared and confused, and I thought I was doing the right thing by believing Kelly. She's been my friend for so long, and I thought I was helping her. I was wrong. I was so wrong, and I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I had to try. I needed to tell you how much I regret everything. I should have trusted you. I should have known better. Please, if you can find it in your heart to forgive me, I want to make things right. I know I hurt you, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you if you'll let me. I miss you, Dad. I love you, and I am so sorry. Lauren. Reading her words was like reopening a wound that had barely started to scab over. Every sentence, every desperate plea, reminded me of just how deeply she had hurt me. She had doubted me, abandoned me, all because of something as flimsy as a rumor, a lie told by someone who was supposed to be her friend. I wanted to forgive her. I wanted to take her in my arms and tell her that everything would be okay, that we could move past this. But the betrayal lingered, sharp and unyielding. I closed my laptop, unable to look at the message any longer. The words swirled in my mind, a mix of bitterness and longing that made it impossible to think straight. I could feel the weight of every choice she'd made, every word she'd spoken against me. Even if I wanted to forgive her, even if I wanted to rebuild our relationship, I didn't know if I could. Days went by, and I tried to push her message out of my mind. I tried to bury the pain, to convince myself that I didn't need her apology, that I could move on without it. But every night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her words echoed in my mind, taunting me with the memory of what we'd lost. One evening, I was sitting alone in my living room, a glass of whiskey in hand, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Hey, Dad. It's Lauren. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry again." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. The familiar surge of anger and sorrow bubbled up inside me, but there was something else there too. A small, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. But the memory of her betrayal was too strong, too raw, and I couldn't bring myself to respond. I set the phone down, ignoring the message. The texts kept coming, though. Every few days, Lauren would send another message, each one more desperate than the last. She talked about how lost she felt, how guilty she was, how much she wished she could go back and make a different choice. She told me about how she'd cut off contact with Kelly, how she confronted her about the lies and the damage they'd caused. She even tried calling me once, but I let it go to voicemail, unable to face her voice. Eventually, I listened to the message. Her voice was shaky, filled with regret. "Dad, please, I'm begging you. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you in a way I can't take back. But please, don't shut me out. I need you." Hearing her voice broke something inside me. I wanted to pick up the phone, to call her back and tell her that we could fix this. But every time I tried, the memory of her betrayal stopped me. I'd given her everything, and she had thrown it all away. How could I trust her again? A few days later, I was out running errands when I ran into an old friend of mine, Tom. He'd been one of the few people who hadn't completely abandoned me, though we hadn't spoken much since the accusations started. He looked surprised to see me, and after an awkward greeting, he asked, "Hey, Mike, how are you holding up?" I shrugged, not really knowing how to answer. "I'm managing, I guess." He nodded, giving me a sympathetic look. "I heard about Lauren's apology. People are saying she's been trying to reach out to you." I felt a surge of anger at the reminder, but I kept my voice steady. "Yeah, she's been texting and calling. But I don't know, Tom. I don't know if I can forgive her." Tom sighed, nodding slowly. "I can't imagine what you're going through, Mike. But she's your daughter. Maybe it's worth giving her a chance." I wanted to agree with him, to believe that things could go back to the way they were. But deep down, I knew that the wound she'd left was too deep, too painful to ignore. I thanked Tom for his advice, but as I walked away, I knew that forgiveness wouldn't come so easily. Back at home, I found myself sitting in the dark, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I thought about Lauren, about the years we'd spent together, the countless memories we'd shared. She'd been my world, my reason for everything. And now, all I could feel was an aching emptiness where that bond had once been. I picked up my phone, scrolling through her messages, reading each one over and over. She was trying so hard, pouring her heart out, begging for a chance to make things right. But no matter how sincere her words seemed, they couldn't erase the hurt she'd caused, the way she'd abandoned me when I needed her most. After weeks of silence, the pressure from my family began to build. At first, they'd avoided the subject, most likely feeling awkward about how things had turned out. I think they assumed that, eventually, I'd come around on my own, that I'd see Lauren's apology as the beginning of a path back to normalcy. But I couldn't. and I felt the disappointment simmering beneath the surface whenever I was around them. Then, one evening, my mother called, her voice carrying that worried tone she always used when she was about to give me advice I didn't want to hear. "Mike," she started gently, "I've been thinking about you and Lauren. She's been reaching out, hasn't she?" "Yes, Mom. She has," I replied, already knowing where this was headed. "Well, don't you think it's time to, I don't know, try to mend things? She's still your daughter, Mike. You can't change that." I gritted my teeth, trying to stay calm. "Mom, you know what she put me through. She left me for dead the minute things got tough. And now you're saying I should just pretend like it didn't happen?" She sighed, a deep, exasperated sound. "I know it was hard on you, but think of how confused she must have been, how scared. She was young, Mike. She made a mistake. It doesn't mean she doesn't love you. It doesn't feel like love." I snapped, bitterness lacing my words. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Please, Mike," she said finally, her voice softer, almost pleading. "Don't push her away. You're going to regret it." We hung up, but the conversation left a sour taste in my mouth. My own mother, someone who should have been in my corner from the beginning, was now urging me to forgive the very person who'd abandoned me at my worst. It felt like another betrayal, as if I'd been abandoned all over again. Days later, my sister Lisa showed up at my house, catching me off guard. She hadn't come around much since everything had gone down, and I could tell by the way she fidgeted with her keys that this wasn't a social visit. "Mike," she said, forcing a small smile, "mind if I come in?" I nodded, stepping aside as she entered. I knew what was coming. I could see it in the way she glanced at me, eyes full of pity and hesitation. "Mom says you're still not talking to Lauren," she started, settling onto the couch. "She's worried about you, Mike. We all are." I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. Funny, nobody seemed all that worried when they believed Kelly's lies. Lisa's face fell, and she looked down, fiddling with her ring. "That's not fair. None of us knew the truth, and we were just trying to protect Lauren." "Protect her from what, Lisa?" "Me." I shook my head, bitterness creeping into my voice. I was the one who needed protection. I was the one who got left to rot while everyone else believed the worst. She reached out, placing a hand on my arm. "I know, and I'm sorry for that, Mike. But you have to understand, we were all just scared. And now, Lauren is trying to make it right. Don't you think she deserves a second chance?" I pulled away, anger simmering beneath the surface. A second chance? After she threw me away like garbage? "I don't know if I can do that, Lisa. I don't know if I want to." Lisa stared at me, her eyes full of sadness. "You're going to end up alone if you don't let this go, Mike. Don't push everyone away just because you're hurting." I wanted to scream, to tell her that it wasn't that simple. But instead, I just sat there, feeling the weight of their expectations pressing down on me, the guilt they wanted me to carry for not forgiving Lauren. As the days turned into weeks, the pressure only grew stronger. My ex-wife Sarah called, her tone sharp and insistent. "Mike, enough is enough," she said, her frustration evident. "Lauren is hurting. She needs you. Do you really want to cut her out of your life over this? Do you have any idea what she did to me, Sarah?" I shot back, my patience wearing thin. She left me for dead when I needed her the most. And now everyone thinks I should just forgive her because she feels bad. "People make mistakes, Mike," she argued. "She's your daughter. At some point, you have to let go of the anger, or it's going to eat you alive." But the anger wouldn't go away. It was a constant presence, a reminder of the betrayal I'd suffered at the hands of those who were supposed to stand by me. I felt trapped, unable to move forward, weighed down by the expectations of people who hadn't lived through my nightmare. It was as if everyone had forgotten the hell I'd endured, the weeks of isolation, the whispers, the looks of disgust from neighbors and friends. Finally, I realized that I couldn't keep living this way. I couldn't keep letting other people dictate my feelings, my life. I'd spent too long being judged, too long fighting for scraps of acceptance from people who hadn't given me the benefit of the doubt. It was time to make a change, to reclaim some semblance of control over my life. I made the decision to sell the house, The place where every room seemed to hold memories of a life that no longer existed. I needed a fresh start, a place where I could rebuild without the weight of betrayal hanging over me. I told my family about my plans, and the reaction was immediate. "What do you mean you're leaving?" my mother asked, her voice filled with shock. "I need to get away from here," I said, trying to keep my tone steady. "This place, it's too painful. Everywhere I go, I feel like people are looking at me, judging me. I can't live like this anymore." "But what about Lauren?" Lisa chimed in, her voice tinged with disbelief. "You're really going to just abandon her?" I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it down. "She abandoned me first, Lisa. I've been through enough. I need a fresh start." The arguments, the guilt trips, they all kept coming, but I'd made up my mind. I contacted a real estate agent, put the house on the market, and started looking for places far away from the memories that had become too painful to bear. After a few months, I found a small town a few hours away, a quiet place where nobody knew my name, where I could start over without the weight of my past dragging me down. I packed up my belongings, leaving behind the house where I'd raised Lauren, the place that had once been filled with laughter and warmth but had since turned cold and hollow.